Hi guys, Dave here, back in the workshop. Today I'm going to tackle round 2 of the Ducato cam belt job. I've set it back up to where we were at the end of the last video, which is the belt off. There's the old belt. I've got the new belt, which is now correct, 153 teeth. The only thing remaining to do before I put the new belt on is to remove the idler pulley, which is just up there. So I'll lower the vehicle down, we'll pop that pulley off, replace it with the new one, and then we can fit the belt. Right, so I've lowered it down to a workable height, and that's the idler pulley. So if I just pop over here, get a spanner on it. Again, they're fairly tight. Because you don't want them coming undone, because that would be rather disastrous. And you get new tensioner and idler pulleys in the kit. For this engine with the 153 tooth belt, the two pulleys are the same diameter. On the later engines, the 2.8s, the pulleys are different diameters. One is slightly bigger than the other. So if you do a later one, a 2.8, just make sure that you get the right pulley in the right place, because otherwise it will put the timing out. And that pulley doesn't want to come off its supporting bracket, so we'll probably have to dig a bit deeper and get that off. Right, so there is the idler pulley, and the bracket it sits on is held on with 3 M8 screws, so 13mm heads. I'll whip them off, we can get that bracket off, and then we can get the pulley off, hopefully, and refit the new one and get it all bolted back up. Okay, so I've got the bracket off. Those 3 bolts weren't actually very tight, which is a little worrying, so I'm just going to see if that will tap out of there, and it is. There we go, ready to take the new bearing. As you can see, those are the 2 bearings, the idler pulley and the tensioner pulley, and you can see they're both the same diameter. And as with everything else, when you're doing a job like this, make sure that the 2 new ones are the same diameter as each other, but it's also worth checking that they're the same diameter as the ones you've taken off. This one is, so that's all good. So those are the old ones, those are scrap. I might just give that boss a quick clean up with a bit of emery tape, just to make sure, because that should slide in quite easily. A little bit tight. We'll just give that a clean up with a bit of emery tape. Do it. Just remove any burrs or dirt or roughness on the surface that might stop it going on smoothly. There we go. So that's nice. Right, that bracket can go back on the engine then. Right, now when I'm fitting a new belt, always have a look at it, and you see there's writing. Sometimes it will have arrows that point in the direction of rotation. If it hasn't got arrows, my rule of thumb is the writing can be read from the outside of the engine. if that makes sense. So that way around. So we just feed that belt down around all its pulleys behind the idler pulley, and I usually start them off with the writing on this top cam pulley. That can be a bit of a fiddle sometimes just to get them into position. If you do like that, and then use a couple of these spring clips just to keep the belt in position on that pulley, and then down below, down here, line him up onto the injection pump pulley. Making sure you've got no slack in there, or not excessive slack, just a little bit, which is fine. And then we can move that clip down onto the injection pump pulley. So you can see him down there. That's the injection pump pulley. And there's the clip just holding the belt in position. And now we go from underneath, line it up round the crankshaft, and then we can put the bottom tensioner pulley on. Right, so now we're underneath, and bring that belt off the injection pump pulley. And we just need to get those teeth to set into the teeth on there, around there. See, it'll go in there, but there's way too much slack in that, so it's got to go around a little further. Right, so once you've got them all round, I use a big spring clamp just on there, just to hold the belt in place on the crank pulley. We've got nice tension on that, and now we can fit the new tensioner pulley. It's much easier to do it that way around than putting the pulley on and trying to get the belt over the edge of the pulley. So do it like that, and now we can put the fixings on for the pulley. So the stepped washer first, and that locates on the inside face of the pulley. Then the big flat washer. That flat washer goes on the outside. I'm just putting the nut on temporarily, just so that I can take, I don't want the pulley slipping out while I take the tensioner retainer tool out. So with that in place, I can now pop my pry bar in there, push that back and extract the tensioner retainer, and that should now give us good tension on all sides. So I can now take the nut off the tensioner centre bolt, remove that spring clamp. I put these bolts back in so that I knew where they were. So now I can put the cover on. And that hole goes over the centre stud of the tensioner. There's the washer on the outside and its retaining nut. These. 4 bolts. The other reason I put those 4 bolts back in, even though I didn't put the cover on, was simply because they also hold the front pulley, front crank oil seal plate to the block, and if I'd left them out we would have a lot more oil than that little bit weeping out of there. Now when I stripped it down, I mentioned the tightening torque for the crank bolt. I've checked it out and it's actually 200 Newton meters for this engine, not the 400, 350 that I'd said last week. So I'm going to put this shim back on the crank first, and just to hold it in place while I assemble the rest, get the pulley on, I'm just putting a slight smear of assembly grease on there. That will hold that in place while I put the pulley on, and again line the hole up to the pin, get that in like so, and that can go on, and then we can put the crank bolt in. Tighten that up. There we go. So that's now tightened up. Remove the rest of the timing pins and locks and tighten everything up. The tensioner centre bolt and the upper idler pulley, their tightening torques are both 44 Newton meters. So I'll do that next. There we go. That's that one. I'll do the idler when we lower it down. Right, so I've refitted the alternator belt. I've had to reuse the old one, which is in perfectly good condition. Ordinarily I would have replaced it, but once again the replacement belt that I got was the wrong one. So I'll refit this one for now. We'll get the right belt and refit that later. But the next step, now I've removed all of the timing pins and clamps, is to turn the engine 2 full turns by hand. This is just an easy way of making sure that we've got everything timed up correctly. before we turn the key to start it. If there was a problem with the timing, if I'd got the camshaft out for example, the valves would meet the pistons at some point and it would lock up and go very tight and not be able to turn it by hand. If I didn't do this step, then when I turned the key, if the timing was out, the valves could hit the pistons and cause all sorts of damage. So I'm coming back round to the timing point. So I'll put the crank one in, that's locked in there. Yep, and the injection pump pin lines up as well, so we're good to go. One small detail is I have a keeper for all of the timing pins and the tension collar, and the reason for doing that is A, it keeps them tidy and I can find them easily, but when you're putting the job back together, if you put the parts all back in their storage compartment, you can see that you've got them all. You haven't left a timing pin in the engine or the tension collar in the engine, which could cause a lot of damage. Alright, so the next thing in is the upper cover, which is a bit of a wangle and a fiddle, but it will go in reasonably straightforward. This centre fixing is a bit of a fiddle to get to because it's quite deeply recessed. So, sometimes what you have to do is hold the bolt in a socket to get it in, which just gives you enough to hold the end of the socket to get it to turn to start on the fixing. There we go, that's dropped in. As I say, that one could be a bit of a fiddle because there's not much room to get your hand in. Right, I've got the cover back on, I've got the bottom cover on, the timing pins are all out, all of the belt tensioners and pulleys are tightened up. Before I put everything else back together, I'm going to turn the key and just make sure the engine starts and runs nicely. Well, that's great. Apart from a slight chirp from the alternator belt, which I shall replace as soon as I can get one, that's pretty good. Started nice and clean, runs okay. That's about it for this video. I don't think you need me to show you how to put the rest of the bits back in. It's a direct reversal of how you took them all apart really. So the intercooler and everything else. Besides which, I need to leave the intercooler out for now so that I can get to do some of the weld repairs that I've got to do on this vehicle. So that'll do for today. I'll see you in the next video.